On March 23, 1994, about 30 years ago, Aeroflot Flight 593 was getting ready to depart from Moscow to Hong Kong. You might assume that because Aeroflot is a Russian airline, the plane would be Russian as well, but no, it was a brand new Airbus A310. The captain of this flight was 40-year-old Andrei Viktorovich Danilov, who had over 9,500 hours of flying experience. The co-pilot Vasilievich Piskaryov was 33 years old with more than 5,800 hours of flight time. Given the long 13-hour journey, there was an additional relief pilot on board, Yaroslav Kurdinsky, who had logged 8,940 hours of flight time. His role was to assist the captain and co-pilot in case they became fatigued. There was also an experienced pilot named Vladimir Makarov among the passengers, making 4 pilots in total on board, 3 officially in duty and 1 unofficially. However, the plane wasn't fully occupied, carrying only 75 passengers when it took off from Moscow. 2 hours after the takeoff, Captain Danilov left his seat, telling the relief pilot Kurdinsky to take his place as he wanted to take a short nap. Kurdinsky took the captain's seat, while Danilov moved to the passenger section, where since the area was largely empty, he could easily find a comfortable spot to sleep. Danilov, feeling very tired, intended to rest for a couple hours and then resume control. Kurdinsky, now seated as acting captain, was an experienced pilot with over 1,000 hours, especially on the Airbus A310, so he was well acquainted with the aircraft. Interestingly, 2 of Kurdinsky's children were also on this flight, a 15-year-old son named Eldar and a 13-year-old daughter named Yana. At that moment, the father of these 2 children was the captain of the airplane. That's why he called his kids over and said, "Come see the airplane's cockpit." It's worth noting that back then, allowing kids to see the cockpit wasn't a crime. Kurdinsky took his children to the cockpit. As we mentioned, he had close to 10,000 flight hours, so he wasn't an inexperienced pilot. However, at this point, he made a big mistake. He asked his kids, "Do you want to sit in the pilot's seat to see how it feels to control the plane?" His kids excitedly said yes. First, he let his daughter sit in the seat. At that moment, the plane was on autopilot. He reassured her, saying, "Don't worry, move the control wheel left and right and see how it works." Since the autopilot was engaged, her actions had no effect. After a few minutes of Yana pretending to control the plane, Kurdinsky told her to get up so her brother Eldar could have a turn. The 15-year-old son took the seat. At this moment, in addition to the main captain who had gone to sleep, there was Kurdinsky in the cockpit, along with his children, the co-pilot, and the same pilot who had been a passenger on the flight to Hong Kong. He had come to the cockpit and was talking with the pilots. All 3 of them saw the 15-year-old boy holding the control wheel, but they didn't think much of it since the plane was on autopilot. Makarov, the pilot traveling as a passenger, even asked Kurdinsky, "Would you like me to record a video of them?" To which Kurdinsky replied, "Go ahead." Keep in mind that all conversations in the cockpit were being recorded by the plane's black box, so we know exactly what was said. While Yana was on the seat, she didn't touch much. However, when Eldar sat down, he started fiddling with everything, especially the main control wheel, moving it left, right, up, and down. The 3 pilots were talking to each other, completely unaware of what Eldar was doing. The plane, sensing that the controls had been touched for more than 30 seconds, automatically disengaged the autopilot, putting control into the pilot's hands, which at that moment was 15-year-old Eldar. When the autopilot automatically turned off, a warning light came on, but the 3 pilots were too distracted to notice. Eldar didn't realize its significance, so the plane slowly began to tilt to the right. Interestingly, the pilots didn't notice the tilt either. Eldar turned to his dad and asked, "Why is the plane tilting?" The 3 pilots suddenly stopped talking and asked, "Why is the plane tilting? Isn't it on autopilot?" As they looked around to see what was going on, the tilt intensified until the plane was almost lying on its right side. At that moment, the 3 pilots realized something was seriously wrong. Not only was the plane tilting, but also its tail was dropping, pinning them against the back of the cockpit. They couldn't reach the pilot's seat, leaving Eldar in the only position of control. The main pilots can't bring themselves up and sit in the seat, so they try to tell Eldar from the back what to do. Their panic and fear transferred to Eldar, who became frightened and struggled to understand their instructions. Piskaryov managed to reach the co-pilot's seat, but the force pulling him down was so strong that he could only extend one hand to the controls. The plane had entered what's called a stall, where it loses lift and begins to descend uncontrollably. The Airbus A310 had an automatic system that in the event of a stall would try to lower the plane's nose to level it out, a procedure that in this case wasn't entirely effective. At that moment, while the plane was trying to correct itself, Eldar was still adjusting the controls. Meanwhile, the co-pilot could only reach the controls with one hand, trying desperately to stabilize the plane. But the Airbus's automatic system makes an error here. Instead of leveling the plane, which had its tail low and was tilted, it suddenly pushes the nose down, causing the aircraft to dive toward the ground at the speed of 40,000 feet per minute. This means they have less than a minute before the impact. As the plane's nose pitches down, the cockpit fills with panic and shouts as everyone, terrified, tries to figure out what to do. In these critical moments, while the plane is diving toward the ground, Piskaryov with all his remaining strength pulls up on the controls to lift the nose and succeeds just enough. The nose rises slightly, and as soon as the plane stabilizes, Kurdinsky quickly pulls out his son out the pilot's seat and takes his place. If you enjoyed the video so far, don't forget to like and subscribe. The pilots are so shaken though that they have overcompensated, pulling the nose up too high, which causes the plane to stall again. The Airbus's automatic system, detecting the stall, attempts to correct it and manages to level the plane once more. The plane is now level, but it's too late. They are less than 100 meters from the ground, leaving no time to pull up and gain altitude again. The A310 crashes into the ground at high speed with all 75 passengers on board. The impact completely destroys the aircraft and no one survives. As for the main captain, who had been sleeping, why didn't he come to help? He tried to, but he couldn't. When the plane pitched upward, it was like trying to climb out of a deep well, nearly impossible. Everything I've just described happened in the span of 2 minutes. There wasn't enough time for the captain to make his way to the cockpit, even if he had tried with all his might. The last words recorded are, Kurdinsky says, "Everything's fine, just pull up slowly." This means they had gained control of the plane, but it was too late and they were already on the ground. Kurdinsky's mistake here is understandable because he was in shock. He had regained control of the plane, but underestimated the plane's speed and proximity to the ground, not realizing that it would only take a second to reach the ground. Highly experienced and skilled people usually make these kind of mistakes because they are overly confident and let their children sit at the controls. For example, most fatalities in skydiving are among the more experienced and professional skydivers. Why? Because they are so relaxed in a very dangerous place where they should check everything. They often underestimate their altitude and pull the check lever too late, leaving no time left. The plane hit the ground so hard that many bodies were destroyed, making identification extremely difficult. When this incident happened, no one knew why it had happened. They said it must have been a terrorist attack, because why would a brand new plane with experienced pilots suddenly bank and dive down? After a few weeks, when they read the black box, they fully understood what had happened and put all the blame on the pilots. One had gone to sleep, one let his child sit at the controls, and the other was chatting with the pilots. However, the International Air Transport Association, or IATA, also issued a warning to Airbus over this flight, saying that the airplane's autopilot or automatic system should not deactivate so easily. If it does deactivate, it should set off a loud alarm so that everyone knows. Airbus itself also took this incident into the A310 simulator to simulate it exactly and see what had happened. They concluded that if the pilots had done nothing in that situation, the plane would have leveled itself. But because they kept manipulating various controls and the 15-year-old child was also handling it in another way, the plane system got confused and went out of control. Now, no one is worried about something like this anymore, because after September 11, no one is allowed to enter the cockpit except the pilot and co-pilot, and the door must always be locked. If a pilot needs to go to the restroom, a flight attendant must enter the cockpit and stay there in place of the pilot until he returns, not just to sit at the controls to make sure the co-pilot or pilot is not alone. You know after which incident this rule was implemented? After this incident, Germanwings pilot Psychosis claimed the lives of 150 passengers, whose video is also available. Imagine if this plane had landed safely. What would you have done with those pilots? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel.